Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the General Eclectic Podcast. I'm Kale Zeldin, and with me today, very excited to have Mr. Paul Rossi. Mr. Paul Rossi, welcome to the podcast, sir. How are you?
Thanks, Kale. It's great to be here. Thank you
Well,
for
so
having
you, yeah, well, no, it's great. It's in the spirit of the podcast, taking our cue from Rod's latest book, "Live Not by Lies." You're somebody that I have watched from afar, followed. I think I first came in contact with you with your story through Barry Weiss's Substack, in which you kind of talk about, sort of finding yourself in the crosshairs of the sort of the DEI wave, I guess we might call it. Anyway, I've been following you, listening to you on podcasts, and we could talk a little bit about that as well. But then you tell me a little bit about you. Just after you agreed to come on the podcast with me, you find yourself in the Wall Street Journal. How'd that all happen, and what was that about?
Yeah, that was a piece I co-wrote with Andrea Gutman, who shortly, just days after I published my piece, or Barry published my piece on Common Sense, she published his letter as the dad of his daughter at Brearley, who he pulled out.
Yes, of course, I remember that. I didn't make the connection.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
by the way,
so
those links are below here in the show notes. So,
so we were given access to through some leaked videos, in fact, of an entire conference called the People of Color Conference, which was 108 seminars, all virtually this year or last year in November. And we went through, and it's sponsored by the NAIS, the National Association of Independent Schools, which is a very influential body. It's an association to which most of the, if not all of the really elite private schools in the country belong to. And it has,
it's a kind of an imprimatur type place where, all the fancy schools, are part of this club. It's a loose consortium. It's not, anyway, but we should talk a little bit about that because, I think that it's one of those massively large institutions that many people just don't even kind of know exist unless you're in the world specifically, right?
Right. And even if you're in the world, a lot of, parents don't even know that it exists. So part of what we've been trying to do is bring a spotlight on them and how they influence particularly the radical transformation of these schools in terms of critical race theory praxis being pushed into them via the vehicle of what's called DEI, or sometimes today DIE, which I'm down with that. But it's the kind of thing where the parents and the children, they hear these glittering generalities and these flowery words, and they think, well, there's this. Everybody wants diversity, everyone wants inclusion, everyone's equity. Maybe I don't understand it, but it sounds like equality, so it must be good. Yeah. So what they do is they are pushing this playbook, which is far more radical than the parents know, and many of the students don't know. But this conference gave us a real window into what is actually going on, because this is a professional development conference, and so they're very blunt and very clear about what they're doing. And we started to watch these, and we're like, oh my God,
people need to know about this.
People need to know about this. So we put in. It took us about 6 weeks to get through all of it, and after a while, you kind of start to lose your mind. But I'm really glad we did it, because it actually gave me a weird kind of sympathy or empathy, I guess. I don't know what for these teacher trainers and where they're coming from. These are true believers. They're not, they're not faking it. And I know many of my colleagues where I taught, same thing. Like, they are on the side of the angels. And so, what is their, what's that psychology like? And it was really interesting to get an insight to it. But then we wrote the article, we submitted it, and we were really happy that they were able to publish it. It came out online last Friday. And the response has been interesting. We could talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, let's go ahead. Let's just go right to that, and then we
Yeah.
can talk a little bit about the NAS and the POCC conference and all that. So how has the response been? I mean, it's a pretty high profile position. I mean, it's one of what, two or three national newspapers. So I mean,
Yeah. I
wide
mean,
reach.
it's funny. Like we have not yet gotten as much attention as we thought. So,
Mm-hmm.
none of the major media things have reached out, and Fox hasn't called. It's very interesting. Some people retweet it, some people don't. I think there's a sense that it's kind of extreme. Maybe, I mean, we really don't know. Like, I don't know
So,
why
well,
it
just to
hasn't.
give you a quick thing. So I retweeted it, yesterday or the day before when it came out, and I get the sense that for those of us who have sort of seen behind the curtain and have ironically done the work, which is the sort of the tag of the DEI folks, as they call themselves, I suppose. It's like, yeah, right. This is exactly what people like Chris Rufo have been dealing with and talk about, or James Lindsay, or where there's a sort of a rundown. Like once you sort of get into that orbit, like, yeah, it's pretty bad. This is exactly right from the horse's mouth. See, it's right here. And so I'm, whatever you want to call that, what do the kids call it, based now or something like that. But anyway, the point is that if you know, you already know, but then if you don't know, you're in this sort of weird cognitive dissonance, I think, right? Where it's like, I mean, inclusion, what the fuck's wrong with, what's wrong with inclusion? Inclusion's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
Yeah.
and diversity, my God, like, what kind of monster are you that you would not want to have, black kids and white kids and yellow kids and brown kids like together? Like, seriously, what kind of retrograde reactionary monster are you, Kale? And then, in equity, like you said already, like, well, equity, it's like equality. So like, that's good. We know that's good. And so do you think that there's a little bit of a fatigue amongst those people who kind of know, and then at the same time, a kind of, I just don't understand what your problem is, dude?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a possibility. It could be saturation on the based camp, and then, opprobrium on the non-based camp. I don't know how you'd put it, but yeah.
No, I like that.
Yeah, I think what we really need is we need to do a much longer piece. I'd like to find an outlet where we can go through, because we had to compress so much information.
Right.
We only got 1,000 words, and you have to sort of use language shortcuts, and those, like CRT, and then everyone knows what they think they know what that means.
Well, they think that, right?
You know.
So they'll play the sort of the game. On half of the country watches, a news program that will tell you that there's no such thing as CRT and it's not taught in schools. And then the other half of the country is like, it's sort of, it's this weird thing, isn't it? There's this weird.
Yeah, it's polarizing, and but it's because of the pushback by design and the concealment that's going on around it, and people they play games and they don't understand the distinction between praxis and the lens, and then the application of it, which is right there in the foundational text, and so the other thing is, I wanted to while I had the chance to direct your listeners and anyone else who's curious about the conference that we saw. I'm doing a series of pieces in legal insurrection.
Great.
That are going. We're going to be able to put the clips in those articles. So if you want to go see clips from it, I just tweeted out something, which has a clip. So these are short clips. We can't obviously push the whole thing out there because that would be a violation of fair use. But
so for my viewers and listeners, I put those links below here to Paul's postings and pieces. So that's down below. So you'll be able to see and click on those pieces, and I think that's going to be powerful, to sort of see it. And maybe this goes back to sort of your original story, Paul, when you first encountered an institutional move from kind of what school sort of has traditionally been broadly understood to an explicitly anti-racist school in your experience in New York City. So maybe that would be helpful to sort of talk about the difference between what school was when you first got there and what school became, a kind of Franken school in the middle of your career there.
Yeah, well, my school, Grace Church School, it started as a high school in 2012 with just the ninth grade, and it gradually built up the grades over the years. Mm-hmm. And from the beginning, it was a progressive school, and that meant, a particular type of left liberal, proto woke, I guess I would say. Sure. And for example, when I got there, we had to attend this 2-day, 3-day retreat called Undoing Racism. Mm-hmm. That was run by an institute called the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. Okay, so this place was pretty radical. So
this is not some like reactionary conservative place. This is this is an independent school in Manhattan. Sort of playing to an audience of and constituents who were left and liberal and progressive. Yeah, okay, all right, that's fine, good, all right.
And what's interesting is that the business plan for the school, which was published in 2009 or 10, before they broke or they found a building and everything, was explicitly about developing a student body that had a type of social consciousness, social justice, because that's what the Ivies and top schools were looking for. So this was a feed, right? So they identified a need around based on the wokeness of the higher colleges and universities, and they fed it. They were like, we're going to produce the product that these schools want, so that they'll get in, right? So that was all part of the business case, right? Which I think is something that very savvy, right?
Yeah,
but then
it's not stupid. It's not stupid.
So from the beginning, really, it was programmed into the direction. Was sort of programmed in. So in a way it changed into something and morphed into something different, but in a way it was sort of in the cards from the beginning.
Got it.
So, the teachers attended these sessions. You had to go and sometime in the first 3 years of employment. I did it at the last possible year, which was 2014. And when I did it, I actually had a kind of a conversion experience. So when people talk about going woke and what that means, I know what that felt like. Wow. I felt it. Like, it's not something that you just sort of intellectually embrace. It is a embodied experience, and we could maybe talk about that.
Yeah,
but,
I would like to. No, let's do that. And just for are you a religious guy? I mean, is this part of your background, or what's?
It's definitely part of my background. I'm a lapsed Catholic. I went to Catholic elementary school. And
mom and dad Catholic, that kind of thing.
Mom and dad were Catholic, and I was an altar boy. And but you lose your religion. I mean, I lost my religion. It was a long slide, and Jordan Peterson, Dr. Peterson got me thinking about it in a different way, and it's sort of a thread back to a kind of a respect for it, and then a real interest in it, and a curiosity about it. And now I feel like it's actually necessary to solve these problems. There's no secular solution.
Right. Okay. Problems. Let's stay here for a second, because I think that more than anything explains Peterson's resonance with people. I don't want to call it popularity, because it's obviously popular, but it's more than just popular. I mean, I think there's he's strumming some things on his guitar that are resonating in the cavities of people all around, right? I mean, it has that kind of body. So I'm really struck when you say embodied, that there's this sort of something in me struck, like there's a chord that goes off that is resonating. And, I'm Catholic. I sort of, I'm a cradle Catholic. I sort of embarrassingly but spectacularly left the church, as a late teen, 16, 17, 18, and caused much agita that I look back on, and it's a little embarrassing. But I was fortunate because I read, I went to LSU for my freshman year, Louisiana State University. I'm from Louisiana. And I, instead of taking like, the 1001, 1002 thing, it's like composition and then rhetoric, the second term, I could opt in, or I talked myself into the honors program, which was a kind of, a great booksy type thing, but nested in a much larger university. And so I started reading Real Things, and being able to kind of get it, and so that blew me up. Anyway, long story short, is I eventually kind of read my way back into the church, and then went and found a sort of a more serious great books program that I could finish up with a little school in New Hampshire that I graduated from. Getting back to this question of religion, I mean, so I've always had a kind of, I read myself back into it pretty quickly. And so then when I went to graduate school and confronted all the theory and the postmodernism stuff, I enjoyed it to a point, but I remember just being kind of annoyed with it, because I remember just thinking it was just, I don't know, just kind of bad philosophy. It just wasn't that good. Like, so anyway, this is not the direction I wanted to go in, Paul, but
but I think it's really,
so so I have resigned myself rather quickly that I knew that religion wasn't dumb. And in part, of course, I come from a religious tradition that even though there's all these sort of folk varieties of Catholicism with, little ladies praying the rosary in the back of the church type thing, a kind of ethnic type thing, that I was introduced into a much richer, to my way of thinking at any rate, a much richer, more deeply intellectual tradition that plugged me in, not only to, into Europe, but, all the way into Europe and into ancient Greece and all of that. So that really settled for me the question. So that at any rate, but when I encountered Peterson, to go back to this point about Peterson, is that I found someone talking about religion in a way that I hadn't really heard people talk about religion. And I thought at the moment that, wow, he is actually kind of giving people an opportunity, maybe a kind of line back to a depth and a wisdom tradition that we've neglected. We largely, broadly understood, nothing sectarian or anything like that. And so when you undergo this racist sort of diversity training, maybe we'll call it, you described as having a kind of a religious experience. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. We should treat people well, but rather it was a kind of a religious experience. In other words, it struck something in you that had been latent. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, how is it a religious experience?
It's funny because, there is a division in the culture between Black people and white people, so-called, between different ethnicities and their ways of being. And so,
sure.
And there's real reasons for that have to do with, legalized discrimination and exploitation. So I went into this with good faith, and what you experienced, we all sat in a circle, okay, and then it was a mixed race group, and then the facilitators did some trickery that I can talk about, and now it seems like trickery, but I mean, it is trickery. But I kind of went along with it at the time. And they take you through this extremely one-sided historical recitation of all of the horrors.
Right.
And they've got you, before that, they get you to buy into the fact that, we're going to look at the people who have been marginalized and not attribute agency to them on purpose, because that was stolen from them. So we're going to do this thing.
Agency. Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
right. So we don't want you to blame, because that enters this world of blame. So we want you to think of them as simply, beings that are being treated a certain way. Mm-hmm. And then, then they go through the history. And I'm like, well, at the first, they immediately say that at the beginning. So at the first, I'm like, well, that's not true, because everyone has agency. And if I buy into this, but if I don't buy into it, then I have to leave. Like, they basically say, agree to this sort of, bracket this thing, and then we'll go, and then we'll come back to it.
In other words, In other words, you're in this
Yeah.
circle.
Yeah,
You're
you're
in
in
this
this circle, right?
circle, and they're right. This is a move. Like it's a move,
Right,
right?
it's a move.
And if you've been to a
And
retreat, if
yeah,
you've ever been to a retreat, for those folks in the audience who are religious people, if you've ever been to a retreat, especially something like a Kairos retreat or something like that, it really is about kind of co-opting a kind of an emotional valence or something and saying, look, put all this sort of stuff on the side for right now. You're at a retreat. You're not at home. You're not checking your phone. You're not checking your. This is where you are. Just come on this. Just come on this little ride right now. It's going to end. Sunday's going to roll around. It'll be over. But just come with us for a little bit. So this is a thing you do.
It's
right?
like
It's
the
okay.
canoe at Evergreen.
Oh my gosh, the
or,
canoe.
Or it's like the landmark
honestly,
forum. The landmark forum. It's all the same.
But the canoe. I mean, Paul, the canoe. Like,
get in the canoe.
Can you ever imagine yourself being in that audience and being like, these people are friggin' corny idiots? Like, I can't even believe that the canoe thing worked. Anyway, I don't want to get into Evergreen right now.
But be in the room. Yeah, okay, right. Yeah. So it's very simple. So you're in the room, and there is definitely a sense of white guilt being in a room.
Yeah.
And also this sense of longing to connect, right? Because there is this division in the culture. So you're being offered this sort of trade, right? You trade away your intellectual doubts, and in response, and in exchange, you get to recover the beloved community. You get to we get to reconstitute in this transcendental unity. Yeah. But it requires you to acknowledge your whiteness, your privilege, the endless blindness that comes from that, and your lack of ability to even identify the source of your blindness. So you don't, your own reflections, you can't trust them. You have to rely on the experts, the people of color, the right people of color, to tell you where your blind spot is, so that you can blossom and you can free yourself of this whiteness. You can free yourself of this, and we will welcome you into the community. I really did experience this, and I felt it. The hair rises in the back of your neck.
Yeah.
You feel a swelling in your chest. Yeah. You reach. People are smiling at you. People that that you may never have encountered in your life. Yeah. Because we have these divisions in society, of course. And you are getting tremendous, hormonal, reward. Yeah. And at the end of it, people are smiling and they're hugging and they're like, it is a thing, and like, that really, and it stuck with me for weeks, and I but then it came back to me, and I thought about that initial agreement. Well, the people don't have agency. We never really got back to that, and some of the things that came out, and one of the questions they asked, I think I talked about this with Dr. Peterson, was, what do you like about being white? So what do you like about being white? They ask you this question, and then you're like, well,
I wrote that down.
How do I finesse?
I was listening to it the other day.
Yeah.
I was thinking about starting this whole podcast off with like, all right, so Paul Rossi.
Yeah. What do you like about?
So Paul, what do you like about being a white guy?
Right. So if you agree to it, you've already crossed a series of gates just to even answer the question. So I just coming back to that, this goes very deep into what they're actually teaching kindergartners, actually, which is social identity is prioritized. Right. So how you are perceived is is your racialized self, and you don't get to choose. You don't get to choose how you're perceived, so you don't get to choose who you are, in the sense of race. Gender is a totally different animal, but anyway. So
interestingly enough.
Interesting enough.
Yeah. Or maybe this is just me being cynical, but conveniently enough.
Right. Well, it serves the right purpose for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that actually, but it wore off. So this feeling kind of wore off. I started to ask, my reason returned or whatever. And I went about my day, but like I noticed, when people were coming back from this before I went, because I delayed going for a while, but people would come back from it and they would just be shining with a light, and they would be talking about it at the faculty meeting, saying like, oh my God, it was amazing. Like I it's really going to inform my practice from now on. And
Mm-hmm.
this cultiness, and that is what these teachers are coming from, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like I have this compartmentalized limbic thing in my
Yeah.
brain that's like, oh, I
Yeah.
can tap into that. So while I was watching these teacher trainings, POCC, I was like, I'm tapping into that. I know what this is. I know where this is
Right.
coming from. I can still, I know in a way, like you really do see how dangerous it is, because it is connected to that limbic thing, and
Well,
they're
so
doing.
yeah, so what kind of spooks me out about it a bit, is this co-opting business. That look, I just said, 5 minutes ago, whatever, that I'm a practicing Catholic, but I'm a skeptical SOB. I mean, I am, I am not ready to jump on whatever swing set you got going. Like I hold things at a bay, and one of the things that I try to work on as a practicing Catholic is to stop making everything so intellectual, Kale, and focus on worship and focus on these other things and more embodied spirituality. But so I have a kind of an allergy toward these kinds of hijacking. Again, and people might say, well, that's rich, Kale, because you're Catholic, but if you don't, so maybe.
No,
So
I think that's why
why?
you
Okay.
have an allergy to it.
Yeah. I mean,
Because yeah, I mean, when you're lost and you don't have a thing,
right,
you become very susceptible to these things. I was lost. Like
right.
what you described about your own development,
Uh-huh.
you very, we left at 17, 18, you went back, but then you had this tradition that you really,
Yeah.
this richness. I didn't get that for another 30 years. In fact, I didn't get that until Jordan Peterson. Like that
Right,
was, I was in the
right,
wilderness for
right.
decades and decades. And even in 2012,
So he's your
when
Virgil.
this
I
is
mean,
happening.
this is you, Dante, and lost in the middle of the woods midway through the
Yeah,
life's
yeah,
journey.
yeah.
Yeah, this is Dante.
And,
This is,
and for me, it was his marriage of the
yeah,
scientific thing, the
yeah.
scientific evolution and so on,
Mhm.
with the biblical
The,
and
the
in the
the the
Bible
wisdom
stories,
the wisdom tradition. Yeah,
being
yeah,
able
yeah,
to
yeah,
being able to unify those things that
yeah,
were opposites, to see them as like, instead of just like two things that are superimposed, and being like, well, that's not
yeah.
true, that they were like coming together in two
Yeah,
dimensions.
he saw
Yeah,
harmony there. That why
yeah.
didn't we get that, Paul, as American Catholic kids in the 70s? Like what, like because again, this is something that
Mm,
by total chance, maybe one might say providence, but by total chance, I found this thing. It's not what I was getting in
yeah.
school. It was not what I was getting at Sunday school or religion classes when I was in K through 8, parochial school. Like I didn't get any of
Mm.
that stuff. I mean,
Well,
I
it
knew from
depends
a
where you
very
grew up.
early age. I knew from a very early age that this stuff was kind of a joke.
Yeah, yeah,
I
and
knew. I mean, obviously, I'm a Catholic now, but I mean, I was like, this stuff. This is ridiculous. It's
well,
dumb.
I went to Catholic school.
Yeah.
I would, but it was a little bit the little old ladies with the rosaries. So
Yeah, yeah,
so it was like,
yeah.
learn the articles of faith, learn the profession of faith,
Yeah,
memorize it,
yeah,
and it wasn't nothing, because
yeah,
I would think about it,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Me too. Me too.
but
Me
there were
too.
the level of discussion, the level of thought behind it, and there was no way to accommodate doubt. And so the
Right.
doubts that you have, there's just no way to engage, because
Yeah,
everybody's busy, and they're nuns, and like they have their
yeah.
own thing,
So
and
my
you're not
experience of
going to
that
get
is,
into these. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
my experience with that is like I had some of my teachers were sort of like drunk on all things 70s, right? So
Yeah, that was the other
guitars,
part.
and felt, and and all that sort of stuff. And they're like just happy to be here. They were, so I had some of that, but then I had a couple of these sort of holdover old school people who I know secretly were hiding like a Baltimore catechism under the table. And we're like, well, let me tell
Mm-hmm.
you a little something about sin. We've got venial sins and we've got mortal sins. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember, like, it's odd, like all that guitar crap just went right out. And I was like, look, if you're going to waste my time playing crappy guitar music, I'm just going to go listen to Neil Young because he's better.
Yeah,
But I mean, I just did. I was like, this
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
dumb. This is bad. But that those people who were kind of like laying out what I would now call a kind of taxonomy of psychology, a taxonomy of ways of missing the mark and all this sort of stuff is like, I mean, without an animating spirit, that stuff is dead too. But at least I was like, well, at least that's like something. Like there's something substantial in that. And so I had a couple of those old school teachers who were still kind of around. They hadn't been.
Oh, that's good.
They hadn't been chased away. And I have a support. My mom is a devout. Both my parents are devout people, and they're both very smart. So I knew that I couldn't really sort of pull the stupid intellectual tricks with them. They were just like, get out of my face with that stuff. I mean, so, but we weren't given, I mean, so like, look, I think I was about 45 when I'm 44, 45 when I first saw Peterson's biblical lectures. And I was just like, this is amazing, And like you said, bringing together some things that I had in my background. I had read plenty of Nietzsche, and I'd read evolutionary theory and had all this sort of stuff. But then I had all this sort of stuff, and he just kind of and brought it together in a way that I found just, whoa, this is different.
I remember I listening to the one. I remember I listened to a lot of these walking around Paris. Like I was there. And I was walking around, and it was all auditory for me. So I'm just taking it in, and the whole thing about Cain and Abel. And I'm just like, I'm like having a breakdown, in the middle of the Rue de Rivoli, because like I'm just taking it all in, and I was like, this is really intense. But I had to be sort of primed for it too, because I kind of drifted. The 5 years after that, I started to get into Stoicism.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Marcus Aurelius, things that were a tradition that was totally wiped out by
Christianity,
Platonic idealism, and this other thing.
Yeah,
and it drew me back into something that was a bit of a thread too. So there were other threads that were around.
So you've got that thread. So then that thread is an intellectual one. And I've been burning to ask you about this, because you mentioned in one of the other podcasts, so we're sort of going away from the Substack Wall Street Journal world and kind of going a little bit into your podcast stuff. But you talk about being really enraptured by theory when you were an undergrad studying French and English. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what do you mean? How did you get enraptured by this? And what do you mean by enraptured and kind of thrown for a loop?
I mean, I was always an avid reader growing up, and I loved books, and
what was your jam?
I loved Lord of the Rings. I read that in like third grade. I mean, I was really into all of these fantasy books, and then I got into more traditional books, Dickens, and all kinds of stuff that my dad would love and wanted me to read. And then I remember trying to read Faulkner in high school and just getting so mad and trying to read The Sound and the Fury. And then I really started to love literature.
I know they always start you off on Sound and Fury, and like, no, it's great, it's great, but don't start off with that, man. Do like, I don't know, something else. One of the other things. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, so I was like, this is supposed to be great. Why don't I get it? Mm-hmm. Like, what am I like? I'm a reader, and then I was like, I got to get this. I really kind of like pursued it because and then I kind of started to get into it, and I got into Thomas Pynchon and all these other books, I remember I was like totally obsessed with Crying of Lot 49 and the sort of late modernism, postmodernist novels. Yep. John Barth and a lot of stuff like that. And then theory, right? So you go to college, it's high postmodernism. It's 1987, 88, 89. Derrida's coming to campus.
Derrida and Derrida.
Right. Oh, and then, you've got these professors, and they're so cool, and like they're so arch, and they have all of these like, theories, and you don't really get it. And you're in these seminars. I mean, I'm listening to stuff, and then we're reading, Structure, Sign, and Play, Derrida. And, this is the shit, right? This is the stuff that you're supposed to get. And just like that thing in high school when I was trying to get The Sound and the Fury, I was like, there's something here. It's not evidence, it's eminence that I'm drawn into this world. And then, the cool, but then I realized like the truth it wasn't about what was there. It was about how you could interpret it.
That's right.
Reader reception theory and recur and all of these other things. And it became like a kind of a, how much vertigo can you stand? That's kind of the way I thought about it. Like, how much
that's great.
meaning? How much meaning can you pull out from under yourself and everybody else and still be standing like in the middle of nowhere?
It's kind of nasty, right? There's a kind of nastiness to it. I remember, so I like I said, I went to a great book school, and so I read like more than anybody I know, specifically in classes. And this was a heavily literary great books approach with a lot, but tons of philosophy and political philosophy and all that. And I remember in one of my, I wound up majoring in English, in literature, we called it. And, a lot of Dostoevsky, a lot of Faulkner, so it was a literature degree. It wasn't an English degree. So I read a lot of stuff in translation as well. And anyway, I remember I took this class. It was a literary theory class that we kind of had to take, and it was good. It was good, grounded and good. But I remember, I don't know if you had this book. It was like the Hazard Adams collection of literary theory. It was this big red book. Anyway,
oh yeah. And I don't remember it, but yeah.
And it's a selection of essays, and it goes literally all the way from, Socrates all the way up through Derrida. It's just sort of this wide swath. And so I remember we had to read Freud. There was an essay by Freud and an essay by Marx, kind of almost back, well, it would have been Marx and then Freud. So, it was like almost back to back because the book was chronological. And I remember reading the Marx thing, and you know what it's like reading Marx. It's you're like, stop it with the exclamation points. Like, and I always just thought maybe that's just a German thing. They capitalize weird things and anyway. And then reading Freud afterwards, and Freud's much more restrained in terms of the way that he writes. He's I think a better writer maybe. Anyway. It became very clear because I'm reading Marx, and then I read Freud, and it's very clear at some point Freud is talking about whatever, maybe Shakespeare, I don't know. And clearly Freud thinks he's smarter than Shakespeare. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, and even at the time, I wasn't some Shakespeare stan. I mean, I am now just because I've taught him so much. He's great. I mean, you become a Shakespeare fan when you teach him so much. He's just amazing, right? How's that for original? But anyway, I'm like, look, Freud, Marx, like clearly you've been pretty influential, but you're not smarter than Shakespeare. You're not better than Shakespeare. And there was this standpoint. It came to me very quickly that Freud and Marx were positioning themselves in such a way that they knew and Shakespeare didn't. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, well, then this is about you. This is not about Hamlet. It's about you. And that really stuck with me. So then I take that kind of idea, and then I go into graduate school, and I'm reading the Derrida and the Baudrillard and the Deleuze and Guattari and blah blah blah, all the stuff, right? All the things. And I just that insight just kept coming back to me, It's like they think they're better than this thing at one time they may have loved, and they no longer love.
Yeah.
And boy, Paul,
wow, yeah.
In graduate school, it's like I'm looking around the room, and you can just sort of see the haggard, faces on my confreres, and it's like they, at one point, like you reading The Lord of the Rings when you were in third grade, like me reading those fantasy books and all that sort of stuff, I got into this because I loved it.
Yeah.
And they have had that beaten out of them.
They used to call me a romantic, like you're just a romantic.
A romantic, right.
Right. And like
sneeringly, you're a romantic.
Exactly, right. Like you're an individualist, you're romantic, and I was like, but it's roman, like that means novel, like that's what it is. And if you don't get it or you're missing it, and like, it's great that you identify the sort of critical turn before what I remember being talked about, and that you have to sort of kill your father, you have to slay this thing, and because and it's an ego trip, right? These people are on an ego trip,
and it is, and I watched it happen, like because I remember at a certain point you're in graduate school and you have to decide, like, okay, what is my design here? What is my goal here? What is my telos? Like, am I going to very quickly you realize, okay, I have to kind of play the game. Like, if I want to be a PhD, which is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a PhD and I wanted to teach at the university. That was the plan. It became abundantly clear to me, by the way, in about 6 weeks that this was not going to happen. It's a story for another day, but it was very clear, right? Very clear. I just did not align with what folks may be looking for. And but you have to kind of make that decision. Am I going to play the game? And playing the game is I'm going to lie. I'm going to lie a lot. And I'm going to get very, very good at lying, because I'm going to tell you that this thing doesn't mean anything, that this thing is a tool, and I'm going to use it. And I'm not going to, you make that decision. And I just remember, like, I tried. I wrote a couple of papers. I'm like, God, I feel like a whore. It just. So finally, I just said, screw it. I'm just going to write my stuff and I'm do my thing and find a couple of professors that'll let me do my old school thing. And I did it, and I took my terminal MA, and very happy I did what I did. But you could watch it happen, like what this turns you into, like when you live by lies. I mean, again, this is in part what we're doing here with the podcast, though. But this notion of living by lies, I think that there is an interesting connection to the work of a school. Like I am from the sort of this sort of maybe microscopic reactionary school that I think that school. Rod asked me this last episode. He said, "Kale, well, what is a school for?" And I was like, well, I mean, who's asking? If you're asking me, like, I think school is about sort of those normal developments of skill, like reading and writing and figuring and those things, thinking. But ultimately, I believe that school is about the transmission of culture, and which, again, puts me on a sort of a sliver of land about, this big. But I said, but in my orbit, in the orbit of the NAIS, the orbit of independent schools, it is not. There's the explicit curriculum about creating change agents. Perhaps is the phrase that we hear bandied about. But what is interesting to me is that for some people, it is about being a change agent, creating change agents. But yet, for a lot of the constituency, it's a much more transactional recognition that, look, I just want to get my kid into Harvard. So I wonder how you see that world. How are they going to keep that world together? You do all of this work. I mean, we're looking at the People of Color Conference and these very explicit. I mean, this is not education like any of us could even possibly imagine. And this is programming. This really is programming into a mode of thinking and being. You describe it as almost a religious experience. So how do those things stay aligned, do you think, or can they?
Oh wow, that's a lot. But
sorry,
I don't know. I do want to say I'm glad because in the question it's good to think about. Most parents, I got to say, at these schools, they're busy. They work.
They're the working wealthy. They're the working wealthy.
Working wealthy, exactly. So they are transactional. Most of their advice to their kids is keep your head down. Do it. Say the stuff. Tell the lie. Get into the whatever. You'll get a hedge fund or something. Whatever it is that this thought that like, I don't want to make them sound callous because I don't think that they're callous, but maybe they are like a little bit focused, and they trust the brand, right? Because they went there, and Dalton, and
yes.
And Horace Mann or whatever, and so the kid is in this place and hearing these things and being told to agree to things, and they don't want their parents to make a fuss. The last thing, most of them, the last thing they want is to bring the spotlight on them because they're trying to avoid it.
Totally.
And,
totally.
But then at my school, it got even worse because then they pick up on silence, the administrators, the high priests pick up on the silence, and they say, we need to target disengagement. And so like, they will constantly say, we need to hear from the white students now.
Wow.
What are you going to do? What are you going to do for Black liberation?
So it's a direct question.
Yeah, it's an absolute challenge. It's like your exit ticket is to write out what you will do for Black liberation.
Wow.
And these kids are like, Well, what is it? What is the message to the black kids? My liberation is dependent on
Johnny
my
agreeing to it.
overseers, right? Like, and these, you know, these are kids that, despite all this is the thing that actually encourages you. Despite all this, they have friendships. They get along.
Yeah.
They accept things. They transact. I mean, it's like there's like tightrope eggshells going on, but they manage to have these things even despite this programming. But it really is, it really is tragic. And they're kids, like you said, they're kids getting mind fucked,
right?
Like all over the country by the millions.
Okay, amen. Like I'm so deep into this stuff. I read, why is it tragic though? Let's talk about that. What is this cost? What is the cost here, Paul, as you see it from your vantage point?
Like the joy of free intellectual pursuit, self-discovery, the love of learning, the love of literature, the love of history, the connection people can make between themselves and like a genuine connection, not just an index card of critical checklist on what you're going to find here, the racism, the sexism. I think back to my own development, like before I kind of got sucked into what I was talking about, the challenge to find heroes in the things, in the work of that you love, and to act according to the things that that the morality. I mean, not a great novel isn't just like a parable, moral parable.
Right.
It's more than that. But you find yourself in characters that are not just the skin color of those characters, but the actual moral choices that the characters make and their development on the page. And so, there's so much here that is being lost, and that means that the people that when they go on, the worst, of course, thing is, of course, they get used to lying, and they learn to lie. And that to me is worse than the true believers,
and sanctioned. Like, right, in other words, it's like ordaining the lie or something. Yeah, and I'm using that word ordain. Like, I'm a Catholic. Like, to ordain the lie.
Strong word.
Yeah. Well, I try to make this point with my own kids. I'm like, look, at a certain point, for instance, we'll be reading Turgenev's Fathers and Sons in the spring here, and it's a great novel. I don't know if you're familiar with the novel. It's really it's great. It's honestly, it's like 250 pages. It's just fantastic. It's just great. And there's this character Bazarov who's the first nihilist in literature. So like it's a Turgenev sort of. It's the first novel that has the term nihilist used throughout the novel, right? So he's writing a little bit before Dostoevsky, and anyway, that's sort of the era we're talking here. And at any rate, I say, look, guys, we are not reading this novel because I have a sort of a weird interest in 19th century Russian politics. I'm not reading this novel because I'm Russian. No more than I'm not reading, Homer's Iliad because I'm a Greek. Like, I'm neither of those things. I'm a mutt, frankly. But, I'm neither of those things and none of those things. And yet what we see, sort of displayed out in front of us is us walking and talking, and the greatness of the story is that it transcends itself in its mere particularities, right? It's bigger. It's a much bigger thing than that. And I wonder, when the teachers who are committed to making their classrooms X, Y, and Z, an anti-racist space and a disruption space and all these sort of things. What they're robbing them, what I fear, the tragedy maybe that you bring up here, is what they're robbing them of is that deeper connection to a humanity that exists, that substrata of deep humanity that exists beyond the historical accidents of our birth, and to rob people of that, like that is that's tragic to me.
What I think is happening is they're teaching through the students. Their real project is the future. Is this beautiful world, which will emerge when all of the inequities are swept away, and they're creating a sort of engine for the students are instruments in that, and that's why you get child soldiers. It's why you get anything, and so but if I give them this experience, but at the same time, it's not that simple. They're not like robes, they're not like Jacobins rubbing their hands. They're actually like, they're good teachers. They're sensitive. They're empathetic. They respond. They know how to give children joy and like give them that experience of being the relationship with the teacher and so on. And so, but with it comes all of this ideology and this certainty about things that are just, that are just so limiting. The project is the future. That is the real student. Like they're raising the future, this future world. And I've had many conversations with them, like where I've just elicited. And if you ever talk to people like this, I would suggest you, of course, don't argue, but really just ask questions and get them to a place where they feel that same. Get them to the conversion place, the place when they were converted, where they feel the joy and the possibility and the hope and this limitless, beautiful future, because then they're going to, it's like sodium pentothal for the woke, right? They will start to talk, and then you can see, like, I did that, and I talked to the DEI director at my school. I was like, what is this beautiful future? Like, what do you imagine?
What is your vision?
Well,
what is your vision? Yeah.
Well, and she said somewhat embarrassedly, like, well, we believe in equality of outcome, and like explicitly, and they're like, and people will give of their own free will to others as needed. Like people will simply give away what others need. But really? Until such time as that, like, we're trying to create that world. So we're going to try to make that world come into being. And well, who's going to make the stuff? And who's going to organize? Who's going to manage it? Is it going to be you? And she said robots.
Come on.
So like, no, I swear to God, who's going to make no. So you get but they just haven't thought it through.
Right. I remember
they're in the dream state.
There's a great podcast. I think it was Lindsay. James Lindsay, and the name of the podcast was "Communism Doesn't Know How."
Yes, exactly.
It's so good, and I remember that. Like, I read a lot of Marx in college. One of my professors was actually, he had studied under Eric Voegelin at Notre Dame, and so he was sharp. Anyway, so we read a lot of Marx because Voegelin understood Marx as being a kind of modern neo-Gnostic. And that it was all about secret knowledge and all that sort of stuff. And so I wound up reading a ton of Marxism. Sorry, a ton of Marx, like his own stuff, right? The Marxist reader that we all had, and the Marx reader, not the Marxist reader. It's a difference. I remember making that joke in graduate school. It's like, isn't it funny? Like, we have a Marx reader, but we don't have a capitalist reader. Where's Mr. Capitalist? I don't see the capitalist reader. That did not go over well, Paul. Let me tell you. Bad reactionary jokes from the gallery from Kale. But so reading a lot of Marx, you get to that point, you're reading his stuff, and he's sort of painting this thing, and like, it's gonna be great, but there's this weird, huge blind spot, like right after all the revolutions happen, and yet before communism becomes a reality, there's just this like dead air. it's like the missing section from the Nixon tape. It's not there. And like, well, like, that's kind of an important detail. Like, how are you actually going to do it, and like, who's going to enforce it, and do you understand human nature? Because what I'm hearing from you sounds lovely on the one hand. What is it? Study in the morning, work in the afternoon, and recreation at night. Like, that sounds great. Like, all right, fine. But there's no actual mechanism to it, because sorry, the ice just fell outside. There's no mechanism to it yet. We're just going to sort of like imagine it into being. We're going to hope it into being. We're going to create change agents into being. And I just don't know how it doesn't end in total chaos, total destruction. And is chaos a bug, or is it a feature? And so the question that I ask you, and I'm particularly struck by the work that now you're doing with K-6, because a lot of the action gets talked about in high school or in college, but really high school's been taking up a lot of the airtime. And that's sort of my bailiwick. Mm-hmm. Why you're focused on K-6?
Well, as I started to delve into these conferences, and even before that, what I started to notice in some of the curriculum that's posted online, you can go and look at it. It's Pollyanna has posted their K-8 curriculum, their racial literacy curriculum.
Yeah.
And I started to be really intrigued by what I started to see was that they were instantiating a kind of morality based around just basic sort of pleasure and pain, a kind of a collectivist morality where, it's like around what is now come to be sort of known as the platinum rule. Like, instead of treat people how you want to be treated. Well, the golden rule is treat people how you want to be treated. The platinum rule is treat people how they want to be treated.
Wow.
Okay. So and all of the, there are some obvious moral hazards with that.
Yeah.
But what I started to see was they're building on the sort of innate fairness of children and towards communism, right? So there is this, that's why I think communism never gets a bad rap, despite all of the terrible things that's happened, just because it connects to this sort of innate feeling of childish fairness, right? Where, this person's got more, well, you should share, Johnny, and that's, you have 2 cookies and I'll give it. So they're able to use these very folksy metaphors to lead kids. And then they do a lot of work around identity, where what they'll do is they'll encourage the child to express themselves and come to self-knowledge about their interests, right? Like ice cream, my favorite color is orange. I'm from Guatemala. And so, but then they slowly move towards what they consider to be the significant elements of your identity, which are race, ethnicity, gender. The things that they can then leverage in later grades to move them towards intersectionality and the sense of like social justice.
Well, what do you make of the sort of this emphasis that I've witnessed? And again, maybe it's just because I've started to pay attention to sort of the whole social emotional learning thing. The sort of not only talking about your whiteness or your blackness or what have you, but down to like not even just your gender but your sexuality. I mean, what I'm going to have a dark take on it. People would probably not be shocked to hear me say that. But I mean, what is this? What's going on here? I mean, like, what do you see?
In one of the sessions that we have, the teacher, the presenter, she's an older woman. She says children are sexualized from birth. That is her premise, right? So, like, when we hide, why would we hide things about children from themselves?
Right.
When they're already sexual beings, and we should treat it like we treat any other subject.
Okay, so what do we say to that? I mean, what do we say to that?
I don't know. Like in a way, like, okay, like, it's disturbing. Like you can kind of see the, and they're not just throwing a bunch. I mean, they are, they're throwing stuff early on, but they will, they kind of start in kindergarten as like an when the first questions happen, like, why am I here? Where did I come from? The stork question.
Right.
The stork drive. So they said, well, they try to sequence it in a developmentally appropriate way according to their own paradigm. And it's not entirely crazy. Like, it's just that it's when it's folding into the gender identity, gender itself is crazy, but
sure,
in my view. But then it gets sequenced into that, and then again it folds into the intersectional paradigm, and also sexual expression. Right? They don't want to have. They're very obsessed with like removing shame and innocence.
Yeah. Okay. I think. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I can hear my head. I'm having like I'm yelling at myself in my head right now, because I can hear what they're going to say to somebody like me,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm a cis heteronormative white guy, blah, blah, blah. I'm, good Lord, I'm Catholic, all that stuff, right? And they're going to be like, well, yeah, of course, because Kale's repressed sexually, so of course he's going to want to control the queer and non-binary, because he's trying to put everybody in a box, and so we're just sort of letting these kids be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now I happen to know that's bullshit, but you can see how it's almost a game of chicken, where they're going to try to make you say the conservative thing. They're going to kind of make you say, well, because they're waiting for me to say the word like normal.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And then as soon as I say that, I'm done. Like I'm not part of the conversation.
Really, it comes down to identity. And if you can break the wheel before it gets there, like I'm all about prevention. That's why I'm going like I'm looking at K through 6, because I want to start a revolution. I want to break this wheel at the earliest, right when it begins. And the way that I think you can do it is by saying, having parents, hopefully through transparency and so on, being able to say, look, my kid's identity is none of your business. Because once they get the child to internalize and introject, I'm a white cis male, I'm a white cis male. Those are the salient features of my existence. That's what matters about me. That's my, that affects me at the level of being because of my, whatever, I'm a BIPOC. I'm a trans, whatever it is that like that characterizes my destiny, and it characterizes and like if I find expression within it, well, it's my whole existence is politicized. If you can interrupt it, it's sort of like the exhaust port on the Death Star. If you go back to Star Wars,
of course,
blow that up. If you blow up identity and say, look, you don't have the right to tell me what I am based on how other people see me. Fine, other people see me. They define by these categories. The self, the transcendental self, is not limited by these categories. I refuse to allow you to impugn me and claim that this is a salient feature about my existence. It may have some bearing on what happens, but it is not. I do not have to identify with it. In the same way that if everyone thought you should jump off a bridge, should you jump off the bridge, right? No. Like, I understand that people may see me as a white cis male.
Yeah.
Fine. They may even imagine that I have all of these privileges because of it, and people may bow down before me. Does that mean that I actually am what they see me as? Like, do I have to? So there's something there where I want to empower or encourage, is a better word, children to say, look, teacher, my identity is not your business.
So go ahead, finish that.
And the same, I'm not going to take your questionnaire. I'm going to it's not relevant. I want to learn how to do, figure in, reading, and have my own thoughts about things. And like, you're way out of your purview at this point. And teachers are just, and they're just not that bright, and they're not getting the kind of education that you and I got. They're getting themselves programmed in these ed schools, and we have ceded the territory to these people. Like, this is the great conservative shame, in my view, like that we have not, and it's because, it was sort of seen as a second-class occupation.
Yeah. Well, another question that I had jotted down here for you, and I think you and I as teachers, are teachers working class?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what that. I don't know what that is.
I know it's loaded.
Yeah, no, and I don't know what working class, where the line is anymore. I think. So
when we were kids, Paul, kids, the delta between what the engineer made and the teacher next door was a delta. It was a difference.
Yeah.
But was it that much of a difference? I mean, you're in the same neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Now, like that's a pretty big one. Unless you're, unless you're a head of school, that's a different thing. Working anyway, but the reason why I asked the question, the reason why I asked the question is, I believe that the engine driving almost all of this is resentment. And there's a real ignorance of both as a noun and as a verb. There's an ignorance of the power of resentment, and I fear that teachers are delivering that, perhaps unconsciously, maybe mostly unconsciously. That's what they're delivering, and that's what they're replicating. And so when you ask, when I ask myself the question, I guess, what do I think a school is for? I think it's about cultural transmission. I think it's always about cultural transmission and what is being transmitted, what is being passed on. What you talk about into the future is their unconscious resentment about the masters of the universe. And how much more crazy is that in the independent school world, where you have parents who can afford 55, 65 G's, just extra.
Yeah. I saw that resentment firsthand.
Of course,
yeah,
dude.
totally.
I'd be a fool to tell you that it's not weird, to see someone drive up to drop off Johnny for the term, at a boarding school in a car that literally costs twice what I make in a year. Gross.
Yeah.
I mean, so, dude, like I have an active, like, okay, Kale, like it's just a car, and I try to be pretty mature about these things, but I've got a wife and I've got a family and, and the whole thing. So I wonder, so it's crazy. It's super crazy in the independent school world. And yet, it's also true. This is not a trend. A lot of the action on this trend is with the public schools. But what I think is so important, why I really wanted to have you on, is that people think that the private schools are some sort of shelter from the storm. That if I could just get my kid out of this godforsaken public school system in which it's terrible and it's this, that, and the other, let me get to a private school, and then you're like, well, I'm sitting here, in the private school world, like it's not different really here.
Yeah.
If not, if anything, it could be more sophisticated, more well-funded, more cannibalizing of the host.
Yeah. And many people have that idea, and I spent a lot of time disabusing people of exactly that, and it's not. You really have to do your due diligence and look at there are gems. There are needles in the haystack. You got to find them and look for them and really research it. And it helps to have friends that know. But you raise something I think is interesting, is this focus on the material. Like there's different ways to think of it. Like I think with a spiritual tradition, you can teach people that they have an equality that is pre-existing, and that the material manifestation is not exactly your worth. I mean, you can have all this stuff, but you can still be miserable. And you can have not so much stuff, and you can have a like a real
a depth, a joy,
depth, and joy, and all that stuff. And that is a spiritual way of looking at it. The equality exists, whether or not, no matter how much stuff you have. But equity is, we're not equal until we all have the same stuff. So there's your idea of equality, Mr. Religious Man, is a mask to allow you to protect your stuff. And that, that's a fanciful notion. And we need equity to get to the place where we can have true equality. Right. And that is a spiritually impoverished position.
That's right.
So I really look at that and say, the better way to solve the problem of material inequality and resentment and everything is to really get everyone to understand that, like, the material kind of derives from the spirit. And if you can teach them to see past their differences, if the the kid who's going to vacation the Bermudas and the kid who's got to take care of his cousins in Queens, and then and that they can find some common ground, and they do this anyway, despite all the resentment.
Right.
So but why not take that approach? So that teaches the kid with more to be truly humble and see what's important about himself, and it teaches the kid with less to understand that kid that kid may have a lot more than I do, but we actually have something in common. So
Yeah.
that's a completely different framework than the NIIS is pushing right now.
Right.
So that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, I know. I guess my last question for you, I mean, I could talk with you about this stuff forever, because we sort of been in similar spaces here. And one of these days, I'm gonna have to talk to you about being on the night shift at a hotel in the French Quarter.
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm from New Orleans. Grew up in Baton Rouge, but from New Orleans, and it's like I can't believe that. Anyway,
I got some stories.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I probably in 1989, I probably would have been in high school trying to sneak into one of those bars down there. So didn't really have to sneak much.
Right.
Back in the day, the drinking age was 18 back then. But at any rate, my question about this, the DEI stuff, the things that you're writing about, the things that you're working with in K-6 is, will the bill ever come due with this? Or maybe how do we make the bill do the bill that's going to come due? In other words, I think both you and I are convinced that this stuff doesn't work, that it does not create diversity, equity, inclusion, the way that you would properly understand these words. But this destroys things. It destroys relationships, and really what it does is it destroys institutions. Will the bill ever become due? I mean, will it?
Yeah, it's going to come due. I mean, it's already coming due. It comes due every day. This goes on. I could be wrong. We could all be wrong about this. Like we could just be a couple of cranks that are like
cis
hanging on by our fingernails. But
That's
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because I see it play out. We're seeing it play out now. In various ways, but I think it is really, it's breeding this kind of dependency, is exogenizing of problems onto oppressors or the state, and then the state is going to rescue you. The state is going to provide, because that's the people.
That's explicitly what's being promised. I mean, that's
and so it's really just the Federal Reserve System of printing money to placate people is what is really the metaphor for this.
I think that's right. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I know that it's never popular to say that something glowing about Margaret Thatcher, but the phrase that has always struck with me, that I will never forget her for this one phrase, which is at some point you run out of other people's money.
Yeah.
And I do think that that's probably true.
Other people's pity, other people's
right. So money, like that, right. Change the word.
Credit, right? It's just it's all a form of credit, right? So just give me credit for this, and I'm this, and I'm special, and you need to date me, you need to validate me, you need to see me in my glam, whatever. It's all just in the attention economy, credit. It's all connected for me.
No, that's rich. I need to think about that more, because I think you're right. All this makes me sad, because I like school. Obviously I found myself back at school, right? I mean, I joke with my kids all the time. I was like, yeah, man, I was like, I was such a mediocre high school student that I had to make sure that I redeemed those mediocre 4 years by living here for the next 40, so it's like, but I like it. I love being a mentor. I love being, dude, I get to read Dante every year. I get to read, right now I'm reading Paradise Lost. I mean,
that's so awesome.
Nothing. I mean, I literally, we just finished the reading. Satan has found Eve in the garden, and he's stoked because she's alone, and he's like, yes, Anyway, it's like I get to do that, and not only I get to do that with kids who are doing it for the first time. Like, that's awesome. And even if they get like 15% of what's going on, like, to me, that's a victory. Like, that's a great thing.
Yeah. They're making connections. They're enjoying it.
Yeah, they're seeing these patterns, and whatever. Hopefully, they'll feel a little bit off of my enthusiasm. But like that, like that's what that's what can be in the classroom, and yet it's this weird Frankenstein reality that they're getting instead. You know, time in the classroom is precious. You know, I come from a school of thought that thinks that specialness, that sacredness, that space in the classroom is so important. It's so important that all of this sort of stuff are pathogens. I use that I think these are pathogens to schools and pathogens to kids. And I hope that we can expel it, man. That's why I love the work, you know, that you all are doing here. You know, the guts to sort of just say, no, I'm not going to do this thing. You know, so all right, well,
well,
man, Paul,
I want to end on a little bit of an update. There are a lot of alternatives being created right now. Classical ed schools are really starting up. There are resources. There's a lot of support for this. And, you know, if we can create these alternatives, maybe it'll send a message, you know, that if there's a line around the block for these schools and they do a good job, it could do some good.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of that bill that we were talking about. You know, when the bill comes due, you know, I mean, I think that, you know, I live by the thought, you know, that meaning trumps non-meaning, and sometimes it just takes a little time, you know. So
yeah.
All right. Well, Paul, man, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on. And
thank you, Kale.
Yeah, you be well. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye.